Madam President, as the Majority Leader just pointed out, the Senate has been and will be focused on responding to the coronavirus crisis in this country in a way that hopefully enables the American people to recover, to restore our economy, to get things back to normal. And that requires dealing, as he pointed out, with the health emergency as well as with the economic emergency and crisis created by this. And with respect to the health emergency, the leader pointed out there are literally tens of billions of dollars being spent now on vaccine research, on antiviral therapeutics, on testing, and we believe that in order for us to get our economy fully back, we've got to deal with the health emergency in front of us. And so dollars have been made available, hundreds of billions of dollars, to healthcare providers, hospitals, doctors, nursing homes, providers that are on the front lines of this crisis and trying to deal with the challenges that it presents every single day. That's what we have focused on. In addition, we have focused on the economic crisis, the impact of this, that it's had on our small businesses, on our workers, and everything that was included in the bills that have already been passed now, with number 4, here in the United States Senate, which have been signed into law by the President, have been singularly focused on trying to assist and get people through this time as a bridge to hopefully get the worst of us behind us and get it to a time when the economy begins to open up again. And so the focus clearly was on helping families directly, making sure that those families who particularly needed the help the most got some additional financial assistance. And so checks went out, $1,200 per individual, $2,400 per married couple, $500 for each additional child. Direct assistance that goes into the pockets of families across this country. And then with respect to workers and small businesses, there was the Paycheck Protection Program, which by all accounts has been very, very successful. And I think the reason for that is that businesses across this country who recognize that they too want to keep their employees employed. They too want to keep those jobs, hopefully till that time when the economy starts to open up again, heavily subscribe to this program. And interestingly enough, there have been a lot of talk on the other side, as there usually is, demagoguing about how this helps rich people and all that. But the average loan in the most recent round of PPP funding is about $80,000 on a payroll of about $28,000. And so businesses can use that principally for payroll. 75% has to be used to be able to keep their employees employed, to keep their workers employed, to keep those jobs there. And 25% used for some fixed costs. Might be utilities, might be rent, might be debt service, those sorts of things. But the whole purpose, Madam President, of that program is to keep workers employed. It is a pro-worker program. Was from the very beginning. And then also, for those who, through no fault of their own, have lost jobs, have been laid off, a significant plus up in the unemployment insurance accounts to the tune of $600 per person per week for individuals in this country on top of what their state might already pay, but a significant amount of dollars put out there for people who have lost jobs through no fault of their own. So this is these are pro-worker pieces of legislation. These are pro-unemployed people pieces of legislation, pro-small businesses, keeping those small businesses working out there, and obviously very much a pro-health emergency, trying to drive dollars toward the things, the solutions, the cures, the vaccines, the antiviral therapeutics, and the testing that's necessary to help us get through this. That's what Republicans here in the Senate have been focused on for the past several months and will continue to be focused on in the future. As the leader pointed out, remarkably, the House Democrats, who are not here but from afar evidently have put together this fantasy wish list of things that they would like to see accomplished. And if you can imagine an 1,815-page bill, they mentioned cannabis way more times than they mentioned jobs. The amazing thing about this, and they will come in here and argue that, Republican proposals are, benefit the wealthy, benefit the rich. As I just pointed out, very clearly the opposite is true. directed directly at families and workers. Everything that we've done has been designed to keep jobs, to be very pro-worker. But the Democrats, in part of the 1,815-page proposal that they have out there, have a couple of tax proposals, one of which would deliver 56% of that tax cut to the top 1% of wage earners in the country. 56% of the benefit of a proposal under the House Democrats' fantasy wish list would go to the top 1% of earners in this country. Now, Madam President, that doesn't sound to me like something that is very pro-worker, trying to help people who are in the lower income categories who are suffering the most economically as a result of the coronavirus crisis. It seems to me, at least, like something that's sort of a payoff to some of their big donors into the big blue states. But nonetheless, that is a feature of the 1,815-page bill that the leader just described and talked about, one of many features, part of a permanent agenda that has nothing to do with solving the crisis in front of the American people right now, but entirely to do with an ideological wish list, all of which are things that have been on their agenda for a really long time, none of which should ever be considered seriously in terms of dealing with the crisis that's in front of us right now. Madam President, as I said, responding to this coronavirus crisis has been and will continue to be at the top of our agenda for the foreseeable future. But in addition to our pandemic response, the Senate is also focused on the other priorities that the American people are relying on us to take care of, from funding the government to protecting our nation. This week, the Senate's taking up legislation to authorize 3 expired provisions of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, including the provision that allows the FBI to wiretap lone wolf terrorists not affiliated with a specific terrorist organization, and the roving wiretap provision that prevents the FBI from having to seek a new wiretap warrant each time a terrorist suspect changes his phone number. These provisions lapsed in March after the House blocked a temporary extension that was passed unanimously in the Senate, leaving law enforcement and intelligence officials without key tools in their anti-terrorism fight. I expect the Senate will pass this bill today, and I hope that the House will move quickly to send it to the President's desk. Every day that our law enforcement and intelligence personnel are engaged in the difficult and at times dangerous work of tracking terrorist threats, we need to make sure that they have the tools that they need to do their jobs and to keep Americans safe. The bill before us today combines extensions of these key anti-terrorism tools with new accountability measures that will ensure that law enforcement is held to the highest standards when pursuing surveillance of suspected terrorists and foreign agents, and I urge my colleagues to support this legislation when we vote on it later today. Madam President, I'd like to take a moment today to pay tribute to my friend and a former member of this body, Senator Tom Coburn, who died in March. Tom and I first met in the House of Representatives, where we both served, and then came to the Senate at the same time as part of the class of 2005. I've been privileged to meet many principled men and women during my time in public service, but Tom literally was one in a million. He was fiercely principled and uncompromising, often to the chagrin of fellow senators. He didn't care if he was one against 99, if he believed he was in the right. He stuck to his guns, come hell or high water. He voted against politically popular legislation and bills that no other senator would oppose. Yet he held the enduring respect of his constituents and indeed his colleagues, proving that sometimes principle can win you more lasting friendship than compromise. He was here for a purpose, in particular to protect our children and grandchildren from the burden of an ever-increasing national debt by exposing government waste and Washington's spending habits. And he got into some fierce fights on the floor in service of that mission. But he knew how to keep fights to the office. Prickly on the floor, outside of it, he was warm and personable. And he didn't let politics get in the way of friendships. As he once said himself, he disagreed with President Obama on 95% of the issues. But that didn't stop him from developing a lasting friendship with the President or from working with him on legislation when he was in the Senate. Mr. President, no discussion of Tom would be complete without mentioning his deep faith. He was an outspoken witness for Christ. If you are his friend, as I was privileged to be, he was interested not just in your present good, but in your eternal good as well. Mr. President, I said earlier, Tom Coburn was one in a million, and it will be a long time before we see his like again. And Mr. President, that's a particularly great loss because the Senate should always have a Tom Coburn, a man or woman of uncompromising principle, of fierce dedication to the national good, someone willing to stand alone in the defense of the right, who provides a constant reminder that principle is more important than politics and that what is important is not winning elections, but in doing the right thing. Mr. President, my thoughts and prayers are with Tom's wife, Carolyn, his daughters, Callie, Katie, and Sarah, and his 9 grandchildren. Your husband, your father, and your grandfather is sorely missed. Mr. President, I yield the floor.